Morning everyone and welcome to the latest edition of On The Whistle, where we're going to chat through Derby County 0, Sunderland 1, a really important 3 points in Sunderland's push for automatic promotion, and a game with plenty of drama in it, so plenty to talk about. I won't talk about the game too much itself because hopefully some of you will have seen I did my instant reaction at full time from the press box in Derby, which you can watch on the channel. But I guess having had a little bit of time, a few hours to reflect on the game, I think by and large my assessment of it was I think Sunderland pretty much did deserve to win. Very much a game of two halves, I think, in the sense that in the first half, I thought Sunderland, without being like their free-flowing best, I thought the game plan was pretty sound. I thought they had control of the game. We saw in the second half exactly what kind of game Derby wanted to play, how they wanted the game to look. They wanted to get crosses in the box. They wanted to pen Sunderland back. They wanted to put corners in one after the other and really build pressure that way. I thought that while Sunderland, didn't play their best football in the first half, I thought what they were effective at doing was basically stopping Derby doing that. Kept them a long way from goal. They held on to the ball pretty well for the most part. They kind of forced Derby into just playing long balls from deep, which I think is something that they were very comfortable with. I think you've got to give Derby some credit first and foremost. The second half, they've got a lot of injury issues. They didn't field a natural centre-back last night because of their injury problems. But they were really aggressive in the second half. And Paul Warren switched to a back four, which was a little bit risky because of the players he was missing. But what it allowed him to do was it was allowed to get him to his two wingers sort of high up the pitch. I thought their new signing, Salverson, who they signed from Viking FK last week, big target man. I thought he was a handful. Anthony Patterson had to make some good saves. So I think you have to give Derby a bit of credit. But even having said that, I can think of 3 saves that Anthony Patterson made, 2 really good saves. And of course, Sunderland did have their chances on the break as well. So for all, I think Derby were very good in the second half, and Dijon Brown missed a big chance from corner when he came on. Sunderland did create chances on the break as well. And of course, they had that second goal bizarrely ruled out, which was, in my view, a perfectly good goal. So definitely some elements of concern. I think about a little bit about the second half. I thought Sunderland lacked a little bit of composure on the ball. At times you were crying out for them to put their foot on it and just slow it down. And instead they were sort of quite panicked in their clearances, which just invited more pressure. But I think by and large you have to give them some credit. A really important win. Derby have 20 points at home this season. They're a very different side at home as they are away from home. It's not an easy win at Pride Park, even if Derby are just above the relegation zone. So lots of positives to take as well, but definitely a few reflections from the second half as well. But I think off the back of we all said kind of off the Burnley game that for all the circumstances of that game made it incredibly disappointing to only get a point. It would be a good point if someone backed it up and won here, which they did. Fingers crossed someone can build on that, because if they go and win on Saturday at home, touch wood, that'll be 7 points from 9 in a really positive week in the push for the top 2. And just before I go into your questions, I put this on my Blue Sky account last night, but I think one thing worth reflecting on is that, quite rightly, we're talking about the top 2 now. That's where Sunderland are, and that's what we should be judging them on, because they've got every chance now of going and winning automatic promotion. But if you'd said to us at the start of the season that at this stage in January, Sunderland would be 13 points clear of 7th position, I think that's an absolutely remarkable record, really, given where they come from. And I think a lot of credit is due to Lebris and the players for that. So let me just have a sip of my coffee and then we'll get into all of your questions. So the first one that I think is probably just worth taking head on and getting out of the way is a few of you have asked again about the goal and what it was disallowed for. The honest answer is I have no idea. I mean, I have some theories, but a really bizarre passage of play, really hard to understand what happened. But let's take it back to the start. So obviously Joe plays a wonderful ball over the top, which Isidore and Enzo Lefebvre both attack. I think Isidore gets the first touch. Lefebvre then lays Isidore up, who crashes it in. Sunderland celebrate. Referee gives the goal. Linesman on the far side, who would be making an offside decision, doesn't flag. And then about a minute later, the referee comes over to talk to his other assistant referee and disallows the goal. Now, I spoke to players and I spoke to both managers after the game, and nobody has a clue what happened. Paul Warren said, the Derby boss said he thought maybe it was a foul on one of his players, but he didn't know. Lebris felt that the offence must have been given for something that happened right at the end, sort of near the Derby box, because of the way it played out. But he had absolutely no clarity on whatsoever. I think it was given because the linesman incorrectly judged Isidore to be offside. there's basically three things that they could have disallowed the goal for. One is Isidore Lefebvre being offside. The second is that the ball did strike Lefebvre's arm in the penalty box. It was very, very close range and his arm was in a natural position, so I don't think it should have been a handball, but that is a possibility. And the other one, as one said, was a foul on a Derby player, potentially for a nudge by Lefebvre, but I mean, that would have been a very, very soft decision. I don't think it can be the handball or the foul, because surely in that scenario, it's the referee who makes the decision because he is closest to it. He has the best view of both those instances by a mile, and he clearly didn't think there was a foul in either circumstances because he didn't give it. So the only thing that really it can be is for offside. And I think the fact that the game restarted quite high up the pitch suggests that it definitely was given for an offside. Because obviously if it had been for the handball or the foul on the Derby player, the free kick would have been really taken really close to Derby's goal. So I think it was given for an offside incorrectly. The thing that remains baffling to me now is that it appeared to be the assistant referee on the wrong side who gave the offside decision, because, as I say, the assistant referee who was in line with Isidore and Lefebvre didn't flag. Didn't flag when the goal was scored. That, as I say, there was about a minute past. It was only when the referee came over to near the dugouts where the fourth official and the other assistant referee are that he gave the decision. And I could see the assistant referee speaking in his earpiece to the referee. So he appeared to be the one who said something that caused it to be ruled out. So a really bizarre piece of officiating, to be honest. And I guess we should just be grateful that that it didn't cost Sunderland in the end. So, but I can't give you an honest answer on exactly why it was disallowed, other than given the way it played out. The only reason I can think of it is that it was for offside. So we've got a question here, well, two questions for Rob and Pato1973. Rob says, why does RLB leave changes until so late in the games? Derby's 5 subs had clearly given them a massive boost, and we were lucky we hadn't conceded by the time we made a change. Pato1973 says, why do we always seem late to make subs? Yeah, as I said before, I think, full credit to Paul Warne. He definitely made some subs that changed the momentum of the game. He obviously made a triple sub really early in the half, which I thought altered the flow of the game. When they went to a back four, they really penned Sunderland in. And then he obviously made another 2 aggressive subs not long after. Did come back to bite Derby mind, of course, because when Jean Brown went down with an injury in the final 10 minutes, Sunderland had used all their substitutions. Derby, had used all the substitutions. They actually finished with 10 men. So it kind of did work against them in the end. I take your point on both occasions that Sunderland could well have been behind level by the time that Lebris actually made his changes, and for sure I think there's an argument he could have changed it earlier. The one thing I would say to balance that out is I do actually think the subs he did make were good ones. I thought Roberts had a really good impact. I thought he held the ball well, he carried it away from trouble, and on the day I think he could have got a goal or assist. I thought he did well. Similarly, I thought Ballard was a good sub. He just gave someone a bit of aerial presence that they needed. And actually, Luke O'Neill moving out to left back, he seemed to have a little bit more energy. Obviously, Dennis Ayrton had spent 75 minutes running up and down that flank. And I think O'Neill just brought a bit of extra energy and carried the ball forward well. And although it's definitely one I would have made earlier, I thought the Sam Edford sub was a good call. One of the big positives for me last night, very low key, because I know he was only on the pitch for about 10-11 minutes, but I thought Salis Abdul Samad had a really good impact. Nothing flash, but exactly what Sunderland wanted at the time. He showed some really good energy. He got up the pitch. He put some pressure on Derby centre-halves, which made it really difficult for them to work it into the wide areas and cross from deep, which is obviously what they were doing so well for the second half. So I thought he really nullified some of their threat. His positioning was good. He seemed to be in where he needed to be to get through his defensive work. And I thought while the game didn't call for him to do anything flash on the ball, he just made simple decisions. So I have a couple of kind of slightly different opinions on that. I do agree with you that maybe they could have been made earlier in the game to try and change the momentum. But having said that, I do think that the subs he made were actually good ones. And in the end, they did help Sunderland see out the game, albeit they obviously had a stroke of luck with Brown going off from an injury, because Derby finishing the game with 10 definitely took away a lot of their momentum. Craig says, any idea how much longer Mundle will be out for? We seem to have very few options now on either flank. Yeah, I think Mundle and Watson are probably 2 to 3 weeks away. So last week, Lebris said, I think it was towards the back end of last week, said he'd probably 3 to 4 weeks for both of those players. I think in Watson, we always knew he was going to be sort of mid-February that he'd be back. Mundle has definitely been a little bit longer than hoped, but I think that's just a reflection of the fact that you have to be really careful with hamstrings, especially with such an explosive player like Mundle. So quick, such a good dribbler. I think there is a real risk of recurrence, so they're being a little bit cautious with him. but I don't think it should be too long. In terms of the other injuries, I think probably just worth mentioning that Sunderland under-21s play Benfica B at the Stadium Light tonight. Jan Poveda is going to play in that game, Craig, so I know you kind of don't want to be putting too much hope in Poveda because he's obviously had a really difficult season and we don't know how sort of quickly he's going to be able to get up to match sharpness, but he is playing tonight, he is fit again, so that's a positive. Jensen Seel's also going to play 45 minutes in that game, which is obviously a really nice development for him. And I think Alan Brown will be back in full training next week. So although at the moment I take your point, there is definitely in the wide areas a little bit of a lack of depth. There is a little bit of blue skies on the horizon. So fingers crossed all those players will get back quickly. And my colleague James will have a report and ratings and all you need to know from the game tonight, the under-21s game tonight, if you can't make it. So do go and check that out. What other questions have we got? So yeah, I think we had a couple of questions about this. Job Sunderland said, is it time to rotate the midfield three in a 3-game week? And I am pretty sure I had a similar question in the YouTube comments from last night's reaction video. There we go. Andrew says, Chris Rigg not quite at it in the last few games. Has he played too many games? Surely he sits out a few now. Listen, I think that I have two kind of feelings about this. I think Rigg's still doing really well. Even last night, he had a big impact in the first goal. Obviously, it was quite an odd one because it was initially his error that led Derby to break, but Rigg did really well, won the ball back, and because Derby had sensed an opportunity, they actually overcommitted, which allowed Sunderland to break. I do think it was a bit of a tricky game for Rigg last night. He's not a right winger, you know, we've seen him play that role in the past, but it's not ideal. The reason why he was there is because Sunderland have been really clear this season that they don't want to play Roberts 3 times a week because obviously his season last year and in the past he's had hamstring issues and Sunderland are desperate to avoid that because he's such an important player. So it wasn't ideal for Rigg to play on the right. You know, he wants to be in the middle and drift over to the right to play those little 1-2s with Roberts and Hume. So I'm not overly concerned about the fact that I don't think it necessarily was his best performance last night. I absolutely agree that he's going to have to sit some games out. It's no reflection on Chris Rigg. It's his first professional season. We've seen it with so many players over the years. We've seen it with Dan Neil. We've seen it with Job to an extent. We've seen it with Callum Doyle. You know, there is going to be a period in the season when they have a lull. And what I would say is that there's no need for any acrimony about that. And that's exactly why Enzo Lefebvre was signed. And with Alan Brown coming on the horizon as well. Lebris has made clear, we had a question about subs earlier, that what he wants to do is to be able to change his midfield an hour into the game to bring some real intensity and energy. I think Chris Rigg's done unbelievably well, has had Job and Dan Neil in recent weeks and in recent months, to ensure that Sunderland standards has never really dipped even though they've had so few options and they've had to play so many minutes. So I definitely think there'll be games where Rigg comes off the bench and is an impact substitute. I don't have any doubt about that at all. And I see it as a real positive. So I agree with you that it's a position where we'll see more rotation both at the start of games and within games than we have done in the first half of the season. And I see it as a positive, and I don't see it from a negative from Rigg's perspective. I think it was always going to be a big ask for him to start 46 games. He's doing brilliantly and he'll keep having a big impact. Shiny Tom says, I thought Meander played well tonight and was surprised when he was subbed. He's more aware than Wilson, who should have played in Lefebvre earlier. To be fair, Wilson had carried the ball from his own box to the opposition goal, so maybe he was a little bit tired in the mind and in the legs. I think that's the one thing I'll say for mitigation for that one, even though he should have squared it for Lefebvre. Yeah, I agree. I thought Meander was excellent. I think he's turned into a really good player. The one thing I would say, Tom, is that I do think a big part of the reason why he's doing so well is because I think he really enjoys having Isidore up there with him. Meander, I think, benefits from being the slightly deeper of the two. Isidore does so much work battling with the centre-halves, occupying them, creating space for Meander. I do think he looks more of a threat than when he was playing up front on his own at the start of the season, which he did brilliantly well, given his lack of experience. But I do think he is enjoying having Isidore doing a lot of the work that allows him to sort of have the space to drive into and dribble into. But I do agree with you. I thought he played really, really well. I thought he was Sunderland's biggest threat in the first half, held the ball up well, gets away from defenders really well, scores goals, creates chances. You know, there's not a lot not to like about Meander. I think he's a huge prospect. And again, I think a lot of credit for Lebris for the trust he's shown in him from the start of pre-season. It's really, really paying off for Sunderland. But again, I think the thing about, I've always said it, I really like Isidore because no matter whether he gets a goal, whether he doesn't get a goal, whether he has chances, doesn't have chances, he runs his socks off for the team. And I do think that Meander is one of the players who benefits from that. So again, a lot of respect for Isidore's performance, even if he, didn't quite get that headline grabbing goal. And ultimately, he did deserve one, didn't he? Because that goal should never have been ruled out. Michael says, what was behind the change of shape at the start of the second half? Seems like Enzo went more central before going back to how it started. Yeah, I think that it was basically just to try and get another man in midfield. I think that Lebris just felt that Derby were too dominant and that it was a little bit too risky only having the two midfielders. I think that obviously it made more sense for Lefebvre to go in there and Meander to go out on the left. I've said it before, I don't think Meander off the left really works. I can understand why in the game it was the best option because he didn't want to make a substitution. It's not something I want to see too much more of, to be honest. I don't mind Meander off the right because I think cutting inside, I think he's quite happy doing that and driving in field. I'm not sure it works too much off the left, and I'm not sure that particular tweak really worked because although it did give someone an extra body in midfield, I'm not sure, as I said, that the chemistry is quite right with some of those players in those positions. But as Michael says here, is Regis trying to find some ways to get all these centre midfield options in for when Mundell, Watson get back. We'll definitely see Lefebvre as a 10 at some point. No doubt about that whatsoever when Mundell and Watson are back. Lebris feels in the Championship that's his best position. Although he's not a weak player and he likes getting stuck in, second balls and aerial duels are not going to be Lefebvre's game in the Championship. Everyone knows that. That's what you want Job doing, it's what you want Dan Neil doing, it's what you want Salis Abdul Samad doing. So I definitely think, Michael, there's a future in which Mundell or Watson plays off the left and Lefebvre plays as a 10. And whether that's Rig or Job or whoever has a rest and comes on after an hour, I don't know. So to be honest, Michael, it was just to try and get a bit of control back and to give Sunderland an extra option in midfield because I think Lebris felt they were struggling to retain possession. And as I mentioned before, Sunderland not having the ball meant Derby could just keep getting up the pitch and loading the box with those crosses. So I think in this scenario, it was just about trying to get Sunderland's possession up to get them up the pitch to slow the game down. But I think going forward, I definitely think Lefebvre as a 10 is definitely a live option, Michael. So hopefully that answers your question a little bit. Let's see if we've got one or two more questions that I can get through from the YouTube comments. Thanks again for leaving those under the reaction video. We'll keep doing them because it seems to be working well. Andrew says, any news of fullbacks coming in? And with Sirkin seeming not able to last the 90s, we need some cover. Yeah, I think that it's one to watch. Lebris's view has been very much that he has 6 defenders now, if you include Yelda, who he trusts a lot. The big thing is obviously this 09 being able to play very well in both the fullback positions, which I agree with, he can. So as long as Ballard and Mepham stay fit, there's no problem. I think Mepham's sort of hamstring issue on Friday, which thank God turned out not to be serious, and he played last night and played very well as well, kind of showed how much of a risk Sunderland are taking, because if one of those, Mepham or Ballard, gets injured and 09 has to play as a centre-half, or 09 gets injured, obviously Sunderland are then really, really short of cover, especially at right-back. So it is something I'm a little bit concerned about. At the moment, it doesn't seem like Sunderland are going to be actively pursuing it. It looks like they're focusing on other targets, and something they'll only do if they get injuries. But I definitely agree with you. I would like to think they're at least doing some contingency planning, because they're one injury away from definitely needing some more cover. So let's see how that one shakes out. And let's have a look. Have we got one or two more? John says, thanks for the report, Phil. I'm in Cork City and supported Sunderland for years. I was delighted with the win and we battled hard. I would like to know who we will be chasing in this transfer window, as our target seems to have gone elsewhere. Thanks for watching, John. Yeah, I think, as you mentioned, Brereton Diaz, I think always prefer to move to Sheffield United for personal reasons. Obviously, had a good loan there last year. He's confirmed that. I expect Tom Cannon to go there as well. It looks like Sheffield United's willingness to pay a huge fee up front is one, because Sunderland preferred a loan to buy scenario. I do think there's something in the Mattia Friggin reports, John. I think he's definitely someone like. I know they've looked at him in previous windows. He's having a really good campaign. From what I can gather, he's got a bit of a presence about him. He's quite physical, so I think he would add something a little bit different to what Sunderland already have. And I think there's also a bit of versatility. I think at different times in his career, he's played in different positions, sort of off the flank as well. So I think that's potentially one that might fit for Sunderland. It's always a little bit of a gamble, of course, bringing a player in who's not used to the league mid-season. But I definitely think Friggin is one that Sunderland are looking at, albeit, Sunderland have been very, very clear, sort of the sources I have and have spoken to, that they're still looking at a few options and suggestions from Belgium that a deal is very, very close isn't quite right. So there's clearly a lot of work to do. But I definitely think he's a target we should be keeping an eye on, because I think he seems to fit the bill for a lot of what Sunderland want. And yeah, I think that is about it. Thanks so much for sending all your questions in. Hope you enjoyed it. And we'll be back after the Plymouth game, on Saturday, with another edition, an instant reaction video, and also an edition of On the Whistle. As I mentioned, some under 21s in action at the stadium like tonight. A few first team players involved. If you can't be there, James Copley will have all the reaction and everything that you know from the game on the Echo website, so keep an eye out for that. Thanks for watching.